I think at this point, I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I just need to like practice more.
Yeah.
Um, and almost like practice one thing at a time, because I
Yeah.
start to realize my mind goes, there's so much, like you brought me, made me aware of so much. And then when I try to like remember everything, it's like, okay, it's harder. But I find when I focus on one thing at a time every week on a
Yeah.
presentation, it becomes a lot easier. So
Yeah.
I think it was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And so have you noticed, I know last time you weren't sure, but have you noticed, are there more like more people wanting to jump on a sales call or a text or anything like that?
I don't know specifically because I don't know those numbers. I could ask the team what it's looked like. This I think it's the same thing as last week. It's like I just think the topic itself is kind of has run its course, and it's time for
Hmm.
another topic, because it's been almost a year of doing the same thing every week,
Yeah.
and so I think the audience is kind of like, all right. The other thing though is like engagement is up, and so
Yay.
they're like way more engaged. It's like you ask a question, you get an answer. And
Right.
um there was a point in I don't know if this was last week or the week before, where I asked them a question and no one said anything. So I just sat there quiet for like literally like 20 seconds. It felt like an eternity. And finally started answering. It's like, all right, thanks, guys. But I just like sat there and I was like, because normally I would let it like make me uncomfortable or skip over or speak too fast. And I was like, let's just see what happens. And
Mm,
that's what's kind of like a side benefit, I think, in doing the work that we've done, is like the groundedness and becoming aware of when you become unhinged or ungrounded, or just like now you're speeding up, and which I never recognized those before. And so
yeah.
you start to recognize that, and I'm just feel a lot more confident on camera, which was great because I never realized I wasn't confident, but
Yeah.
you made me aware of all these things that are happening because of insecurity or worried or fear or whatever. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and I think that's, such a great realization with where you're at with the webinar mastermind is to focus on one thing so that it doesn't feel like your brain is going to all these things. And so what I usually say is like, what's your intention before you get up to start it? And so if we just have one intention, obviously it's much easier to focus on that one, nail it down, and feel really confident and good about it, and then move on to the next.
Right.
And that can be very powerful. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Awesome.
Yep.
I also listened to your podcast. Was that the one you were saying was the best interview you've had? Is the one that you just did?
I think it might have been,
Yeah, I
but
think so. I think you were mentioning it like a couple of weeks ago. And
yeah.
I did notice the interaction between the two was very effortless. It was a great conversation. It felt like you were more open in this
Mhm.
interview versus other ones. Like you were very willing to share and gain from your perspective of, what was going on with, I think it was your daughter. And it
Mhm.
was just a really nice uh, journey. Like it didn't feel like you were stuck on these are particular questions I want to ask for the entrepreneur.
Right.
Like whatever sort of thought came into your head, you went with it, and it was very closely tied into what you're talking about. And I just thought, wow, there is a shift going on in the podcast as well.
Yeah, I've noticed it there, especially on the solo episodes, which I haven't done a ton lately. But even like the last interview I did with Jim too, it felt very, smooth, effortless. You even made a comment too in my Instagram story. You're like, your voice sounds great, and I was like, oh, I was just talking normal, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, it is. It's sounding stronger. It's sounding really good. Do you notice, because I'm listening to your voice now, it doesn't sound as sort of like mucusy, and that I know you talked about that you don't have the post nasal drip anymore. Is that,
It's it's not in my awareness anymore, I
yeah,
think is the
okay,
best way to put it. So like before
awesome.
it'd be, wow, there's something in your throat, clear your throat, something in your throat, clear your throat, something. And It's just not like that anymore. In
Okay.
fact, I didn't even think of it until you mentioned it right now. And then as soon as you mentioned it, I'm like, oh, I got to clear my, there's like a feeling, a
I
desire to
need,
like, but unless it enters here, it doesn't seem like it happens anymore.
yeah, okay,
Um,
awesome. Because I've noticed
yeah.
that, since we've been on what, 8 minutes now, you haven't cleared your throat. So this is this
Yeah.
is huge. Okay, cool. All right. So I just wanted to like quickly go through and just check in first if there's anything with like the warm-up exercises I gave you that you need clarity on, or you still feel like you're unsure about. Are you still doing it? How's that going?
I'd still do before the presentations. I
Hmm.
do as many of the exercises as I can. Lately, I've just been getting to bed really late. So I wake up like just before, so I don't go through all of them. But the
Yep.
breathing ones I do. The
Cool.
like this one has always been, for some
Projection.
reason, this is really projecting. That
Yeah.
one has been really, really powerful for me.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I talk, I'm mindful of just like
Right.
I have an invisible hand going out there, so I'm doing that.
Good.
The only ones I haven't done is the straw, like the voices through the straw. I usually do the breathing and then projecting and those ones. But
Yeah,
I know
cool.
how to do them. I just haven't put the
Yeah.
time in to do it.
The straw one is great for the leaning off of the vocal cords. So if you're
Mm,
still feeling any sort of like strain or tiredness there, then I would bring that back in. Just keep
okay.
checking in like when you're speaking, not when you're on the webinar, but just like talking out loud like we are now, if you start to feel like things are kind of going back into
Right.
so like I'm like seriously doing it now, and I can start to
Right.
feel it here, and it starts to get kind of gravelly. And then when I release that and I start breathing down into the lower belly, all of that goes away.
Okay. Yep.
Where you might notice it is at the ends of your thoughts. If you lose breath, then what happens is at the very end, it drops
Mm-hmm.
in. So that's what you want to kind of check in for.
What's really interesting too is going back to it was the day I was at the zoo. I forget what day that was, but
Yeah.
we talked about the story of why the voice is going back. And even right now, when you ask me about the exercises, I realized I wasn't doing all of them, but I
Mm.
was doing some of them.
Hmm.
And then I realized, as I told you, I wasn't doing all of them. I could feel like, oh gosh, you're gonna get in trouble. So I was like, I could
Mm.
feel it wanting to come back in when I was doing
Yeah.
that. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
He's not speaking with confidence, not, there's some sort of fear or worry attached to it. And then when that happens, it goes back
Goes
in.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's sort of our safety net. That's that like invisible protection of if we don't want to get in trouble or we don't want to fully be seen, the vocal energy goes inward,
Yeah.
which is I think, great that you're gravitating towards the projection, but then we also want to check in and just make sure that it's still not like gravitating towards here, because
Yeah.
that's also kind of, yeah, it is that protection, not
Yeah.
fully amplifying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how many of these things are like running and
You
you're not
don't know?
aware of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you become aware of it, you're like, oh my God, I can see it everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. And it's almost like you can't tune it out. So like, so I don't know. Do you know what your primary modality is? Like, are you a visual person, auditory, kinesthetic?
No, I think if I had to guess, I'd say more, probably visual is,
Visual.
yeah.
Yeah. So that would be like the thing that really sort of stands out for you is that actually makes sense. Like you see the words probably, and you can recognize when messaging is off or when it's like,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's the same thing with my ear. I can hear when something is off. I can hear when something's protected.
Mm,
I can hear when somebody is not being truthful. It's all told through the nonverbal. So the words, what we know of communication, the words are only 7%. So what you're giving off visually when you show up on camera or on a stage and what you're saying, seeps into their subconscious, and their
Mm,
subconscious picks up on it. So it's not just the actual words, but it's what you're delivering. So if you're starting from a
right.
place where there's some sort of hesitation or doubt or something that's holding you back, they pick up on that energy. And that,
Yeah.
kind of like when we talk about like the law of attraction and the law of vibration, that's what you're giving out to them. So when we want to start increasing those conversions and results, we've got to start looking within to say, okay, well, what am I sending out? What sort
Mm,
of signals am I cueing to my audience subconsciously without me realizing it? And then the
right.
fun part is on the webinar where you can start playing with the subconscious communication that you're sending out to them. How do you play around with your pace, your pausing, your melody, your volume, the specific words that you emphasize? What are the thoughts, the intentions, the feelings that you want them to feel throughout?
Hmm. Yeah. Makes
So you
sense.
link that to the words and it becomes really intense and really cool.
Yeah. I mean, that part, especially during the diagnosis phase of the webinar, has been really, really big. And
Yeah.
that's, I kind of messed up on the last webinar on the mistake slide because I got too much into my head of like,
Mhm.
oh, wait, what was the emotion on the last one? And this, and then, but even just understanding and knowing that, I've seen a big difference in the diagnosis stage for sure.
Amazing. So yeah, so like the sort of the things that you can play around with when you're thinking about like taking your audience on a journey, I always think of like what is that one specific keyword that sums up what that sentence is all about, and how do you want them
Mhm.
to think or feel in that moment, which we talked about. But how you can play around with your vocal toolkit with that is with pacing and pausing. That's one of like the probably the stronger things you can do. I always think of, if we look at a sentence and we've got like that powerful word and maybe some other words that are kind of powerful as well, and then some words that are not. There's sort of like three types of words. There's the primary keyword, which I always think of as like Tom Cruise in a Tom Cruise movie. The
Mhm.
secondary keywords are the supporting actors who are important to the movie, but they will never take the spotlight off of Tom Cruise. And
Mm.
then your connecting words are like the extras in a movie. They will never take the spotlight over Tom Cruise. It's always Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
So the connecting words, I always think of it like you're running in one of those, remember like when we were in high school and we would, oh, you're a runner, aren't you?
Yeah.
Did you ever do hurdles?
Didn't do hurdles. No, it's more long distance.
So you know how like you've seen people who run hurdles, like they're run, run, run,
Hmm.
run, run, and then they leap over the hurdle, and it's like,
Right.
wow, look at them leap. That's your primary keyword or your secondary keywords. That's what we want to spend our time on. The connecting words, which are like the extras in the movie, those little words, we want to run, 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 and then put the spotlight on that really important word. And what that does to the audience's
Mm.
ear is it spotlights. They go, oh, I've got to pay attention to that. So when you
Right.
you play around with the pacing and then you spotlight those really important words and then you finish it with a pause so that they can digest the information, that's where it starts to become really effective in the messaging really resonating and landing with them.
I see. Okay. Makes sense.
Do you want to play around with that? Is there
Yeah.
any slides in your
Yeah. I think going back to the diagnosis stage would probably
yeah
be the easiest. So, like, hurdle words would be crickets, doubts, that sort of
yeah
thing. Always crickets and doubts.
yeah anything that you want your audience to hear?
Okay. So it'd be like, you post content you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get sales. Your content is always, say, okay, hold on. You post content you're proud of and it's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
Okay, so when I read this and I'm looking at what you've got here,
Mm-hmm.
it's about posting content. So what happens when you post content? Well, it's crickets. Why? Because we've got
Mm.
doubts. So those are like sort of the main kind of points that are coming out to me. So if I was delivering this, I would spotlight those words. So I
Okay.
would be quick on you because that gives us nothing. It's really about the
Mhm.
posting content. You post
Okay.
content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
I see. Okay. You post tons of you post content you're proud of. You post content you're proud of and it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
So we're just going to have a play. So it's less about like truthful, honest delivery because we're going to be like super in our head and just getting like really technical so you can kind of feel where we're
Okay.
putting our emphasis. So we'll break it down into shorter segments because that'll be easier.
Okay.
So if you carries zero weight
Hmm.
and the topic of this is about posting content, that's where we want to really spotlight. So it'd be like running and then you're hurtling over post content. So it
Okay.
sounds like this: quick and joy. You post content. So then it would be you're proud of. That's not as important. So I'm going to go quick through that. You
Okay.
post content you're proud of. It's gold. Maybe you want to spotlight that. So it's quick and joy. Now we get to, but you never get sales. So anytime we've got a negation, important to spotlight. What are they never getting? Sales. So we've got to hit that. So I'm going quick through, but you, and then I spotlight never and maybe even getting sales. But you never get sales. And then
Okay.
quick on probably your content is, because we've already talked about the content and spotlighting always crickets. Your content is always crickets. And then quick on, and you have a ton. So once we get to ton, again, that's a very extreme word. I would spotlight that and then doubts. And you have a ton of doubts. So it sounds something like this. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts. So I'm hitting post content, always crickets, ton doubts. That's what I want them to hear.
Okay. You post content you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content all your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
Okay, good. Now I know this is like totally different to how you would normally speak. So
Yeah.
this time, yeah, it's like it brings up all the shiz, right?
Yeah.
So this time we're just going to spotlight the words that we want our audience to hear. I call it
Okay.
Tarzan talk. So we're just going to
Okay.
say post content, never sales, always
Okay.
crickets, ton doubts.
Post content, never sales, always crickets, ton of doubts.
Yeah, so that's what we want our audience to hear. All those other words are just there to form a complete sentence, really. Let's do it in segments so it'll be easier.
Okay.
So just try you post content you're proud of, it's gold. So quick
You
on all the words except post content. Put your attention there.
you post content you're proud of. It's gold.
So you're going to be quick on you, quick on you're proud of, quick on it's gold. So it's kind of like this. You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
You post content you're proud of. You post content you're proud of. It's gold, but you
Yeah. So
never get any sales. It almost
even
it feels weird. Gotta be
it
honest.
is
It
going to
feels
feel
like
weird. Yeah, I know, I know.
it's just
I'm
like,
being like so technical with you just so you can get a feel of
yeah.
where we're headed, and then you're just going to run with it. We're not going to do this ever in actual like speaking. So it's quick on you, spotlight post content, quick on you're proud of it's gold. So it sounds like this. You post content, you're proud of it's gold. Here, there's like a little bit more of a pace after post content.
Hmm. You post content you're proud of. It's gold.
Good. Even slower on post content and louder on
Okay.
post content. You post content, you're proud of its gold.
So when you say slow on post content, do you mean literally say it slower or pausing after you say it?
You post content you're proud of, it's gold. You can pause after it.
But
What
just
I
say it
mean is just
slower.
like slowing down the pace. So you want to say it slower and louder just on
Yeah.
post content.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never,
Even slower on post content.
dang, really?
Yeah.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you
But the
never get
you're
any.
proud of gold is going to be fast. So the only thing you're saying
Ah,
slow is post content. So it
okay.
sounds like this. You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
You post con you post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Almost there. Try it again.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Almost there. Even slower on post content and louder on post content.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is really hard.
It is hard.
You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Okay, everything got stretched out now. So the
Yeah.
only thing we
You
want loud and slow is post content.
okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Okay, good, good. One more time.
You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
There you go. Getting there. Now, can you get louder on post content? So you
Okay.
boost up the volume a little bit on post content, only post content.
You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Yes. Okay, again.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold.
Okay, good. All right. So what we're doing now is you're attracting my ear to what needs to be heard, posting content.
Yeah.
Now let's try the next bit, which is, but you never get sales. So I want you to get louder and slower on never and
Okay.
also sales. So it's quick on
Okay.
but you never, so I'm getting louder, but you never
Mm,
get sales.
okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales.
Okay, good. Let's just focus on, but you never get sales. So less on but gives us
Mm,
nothing.
okay.
Never gives us a lot. So, but
Okay.
you is quick, but you never get sales.
But you never get sales.
Yes. Okay. So tie those two together.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales.
Good. Okay. Starting to come together. All right. So let's try the next one. Your content is always cricket. So quick on your content is, and then loud and slower on always crickets.
Your content is always crickets.
Okay. And now louder on always crickets so we don't fizzle out on the energy.
Mm. Your content is always crickets.
Ooh, good. Nice. Okay. And you have a ton of doubts. So quick on, and you have a loud on ton and loud on doubts.
Okay. And you have a ton of doubts.
Ton of doubts.
Okay. And you have a ton of doubts. And you have a ton of doubts.
Okay, good. Now we're going to tie it all together. I'll do it once for you, and then you just take your time through it. So you post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content is always crickets, and you have a ton of doubts.
You're so good at this. All right.
I'm a voiceover person.
I know. All right, here we go. You post you post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
Beautiful. Okay, now just throw it away and just tell me. So, what's wrong with my content, Brandon?
You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
How did that last one feel?
Feel really good.
Yeah, that really lands. Like now I'm
Well,
resonating with it.
I honestly, I probably would have cried if you told me it was terrible.
No, that
Because
was so
it felt
good.
so good. And I was like, oh my gosh.
That was really good. That was really
Yeah,
good.
it
That
felt really good.
I want to cry, Brandon. That was so good.
It
Because what you're
was,
doing now is like you're connecting with me and you're sharing the information that I need to hear. instead of just saying
Yeah.
words.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It's so
Um,
powerful. Do you
yeah,
want to
I
try?
mean,
Oh,
it
sorry. Go
helps
ahead.
going through the each one
Yeah.
because it's like, I don't know if it's like muscle memory or something, because then
Yeah.
when you stop thinking about it, it's like, oh, okay, I got
It's
this.
there. Yeah. Two
Yeah.
things. One is what I'm teaching you is a skill, like
Yeah.
to be able to identify the words that your audience needs to hear.
Mm,
And the feeling that they need to hear will automatically be there now because you know how to connect with them, that it's about them.
right.
um the it's identification, and then it's just letting it go, and it is one of those things. It's like the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and then it just becomes automatic to where, like, I could read anything cold and know exactly what words need to land. You're posting a minimum 3 times a week, no interactions, engages, or likes on your content. And because no one ever follows the CTA, you never get any leads.
Mm,
I'm just reading
yeah,
that
that's
cold,
really good.
right? So you'll
Yeah,
know
it's
they're your words.
yeah. Okay.
Mm.
I'm usually in the roles are usually reversed. People are like, oh, it's so easy to you. I'm like, I know. but to watch someone else where it comes really easy and I struggle, I'm like, okay, this is how it's a good reminder of how my students feel. Cause I'm like, man, it's gonna take some practice, but it's good.
Do you think that when this becomes second nature, because I know this is sort of like
Hmm.
a new sort of concept and stuff, can you see how this will help with the overall delivery and
Yeah,
connection?
of course.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Do you want to try the next one?
Sure. Okay.
So again, let's break it down in chunks. So let's just go to the comma. When you sell it, it feels like you have, you know what? First, can you just read the whole sentence as is?
Sure. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention.
Okay, cool. You feel how you're like forcing yourself to land on those bold
Hmm.
words, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right, so let's play around with this and see if we can
Okay.
get that to shift. So let's just go to the comma. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince. So what are the important words here?
Convince, beg, explain, buy, um,
Sorry,
preaching.
just to the comma. So in the first section,
Oh,
when
got
you
it, got it, got it,
sell,
got it.
it feels like you have to convince.
I would say sell and convince.
Perfect. So can you see how it's that like cause and effect? Like when you do
Yep.
this, that, yeah, okay, perfect. So we want to hit sell and convince. So all the other words we want to say fast: sell,
Okay.
convince, loud, and a little bit slower. When you
Okay.
sell, it feels like you have to convince.
Okay. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
It feels like you have to convince.
When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
Okay. So um, you can pick up the pace on convince because now it feels like it's getting a bit stretched out. So
Okay.
just think, maybe this time, just think loud instead of slow on sell
Mm,
and convince.
okay.
So quick when you, loud sell. When you
Okay.
sell, then quick. It feels like you have to convince. It feels like you have
Okay.
to convince.
When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
And instead of to convince, what's easier for you to say is to convince, because then it links it to convince and it puts a
Convince.
spotlight on convince.
Okay. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
It feels like you have to convince.
Feels like you have to convince.
Hmm.
Okay. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
There
When
you
you
go.
sell, it feels like you have to convince.
You have to convince.
Convince.
Yeah. So what happens
So
is,
what's the is the so it's I understand it's supposed to be louder, but what's the tone supposed to be? Like convince or like what are we
so it's
is
less about how it's going to be delivered. It's more about how do you want them to feel in this moment.
I see. Okay.
When you feel that feeling, it will come out as it naturally has to come out.
Mm,
You don't have to force it. So how do you want them to feel?
frustrated.
Frustrated.
Yeah. Just,
When you sell, it feels like you have to convince. I'm
Okay.
frustrated. Versus when you sell, it feels like you have to convince. I'm trying to push
Mm,
a feeling,
yep.
right? I
Yep.
know what it feels like. It's frustrating, isn't it? It's frustrating when you sell and you have to feel like you got to convince. I
Okay.
get it. Yeah, all you have to
When
do
you,
is feel
when you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
it. Yep, there you go.
Okay.
So it
When you
becomes less
sell,
about reciting the words on there and more about feeling it.
I think that's what I was missing, even with the first one,
Yeah.
is more about volume and speed than it was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
that's why I said, like, this is going to be very sort of like technical, like you're going to be in your head because I'm directing you to do things you wouldn't
right.
naturally do in conversation, only so you can start to, when we get into that natural conversation, you'll start to feel what it feels like when you land on those words and we let it go.
Right. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
So you're still convincing me on sell and convince. So now this time, just let it go. So Brandon,
Okay.
what happens when I'm trying to sell? So I get about the content, but now what happens when I'm trying to sell?
Well, when you sell, it feels like you have to convince.
Yes.
Okay.
Now we're having a conversation.
Okay.
So
That's the
that's
other thing, feeling in conversation.
yeah. So all of these points, like when you are on this mastermind with people, that's what you want to feel like they've just asked you a question and you're responding. Well,
Yeah,
Brandon, what
that's
about when I
helpful.
sell? Well, when you sell, well, what about when I post? You're posting a minimum of 3 times. But what about all these problems? Well, if I asked you to name these 3 problems, right? So it feels like I
Yeah.
said something to you and then you're replying.
Okay.
Do you want to try that with the first one?
Yeah.
And then we'll do it into the second and then the third and the fourth. So before each one, I'm going to say something and then you're going to respond.
Okay.
Okay. Brandon, okay, I've been posting a lot of content and I'm not getting any traction.
Well, you post content, you're proud of, it's gold, and you never get any sales. Your content's always feeling like crickets, and you have a ton of doubts.
Okay, that's fine. But what about when I sell?
When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention.
What about when I post? I, I don't know if I'm posting enough.
You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week, and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And
True.
because no one ever follows your call to action, you never get any leads.
So what's wrong with me?
If I had to ask you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, you likely couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds. It's like you never realized that you're here to solve people's problems.
Okay, good. So almost there, but it still sounds like you're delivering uh, the sentence as you know
Okay.
as it should
Yeah.
be in a professional setting instead of a conversation.
Yeah.
So even if
But I will say it felt better than before. Like
it was
it
better,
yeah.
yeah,
Since
100%. It's so much better, but we can make it even better. Now
cool.
we want to make it a conversation. So even if you
Okay.
want to like riff and just improvise what's on there, when I say something and you respond, instead of delivering the exact words on there, you could just say
Mhm.
whatever comes to mind, but
I see.
really hook up to me and respond to me versus just delivering what's on the screen, right? So
Okay.
as if I was sitting in that room with you and we were just talking about this, like having a real
Mhm.
conversation. Okay.
Okay.
So, Brandon, here's the thing. I'm starting to doubt my content.
Yeah, it probably feels like you're posting content that you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get any sales.
Yeah.
Your content's almost let me restart that again.
It was pretty good. Brandon, I am just starting to second guess everything I do when I post content.
Yeah, you're probably posting content that you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
True. What about when I sell? That's the thing. Like, I'm having difficulty selling as well.
The biggest problem most people have is that when it comes to selling, it feels like you almost have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention.
Hmm, I know. And like, thing is, like, if we go back to posting the content, I just don't feel like I'm getting any sort of like acknowledgement from my audience.
Let me ask you, are you posting a minimum of 3 times a week and not really getting anyone to interact, engage, or like the content? And then because of that, no one's following the call to action. So you're never getting any leads.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've got a problem.
Look, if I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, could you tell me in under 60 seconds? Most
Hmm.
people can't. It's like you never realize that you're here to solve people's problems.
Okay, cool. How did that feel?
It felt good, but I found myself wanting to frame them as questions, which was interesting.
You know, when if you're framing it as a question, it starts to bring in more engagement, actually, where you're actually
Yeah.
asking them a question. And I think I naturally do that when I go through this. I'm trying to think of how I do it because
Well,
that
even the
helps create engagement. It gets
well, the
them to
headline
come
even
back.
says, "Does this sound like you?" So
Yeah.
it's almost framed as a question. So I'm almost wondering if I should reframe these as questions. But
Well, you don't necessarily have to do it on the screen. It could just be a question. So
mm,
tell me, does any of this sound like you? So you post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you're never getting any sales. Have you noticed that your content is always crickets and you have doubts? Does that resonate? Well, but see, you like to do it where you do all of these and then at the end you go of any of
yeah,
these. So
yeah,
I don't want you to feel like you have to change it if it's working.
okay. Yeah, it was just interesting. It was just like as when I looked at it through the lens of
Mm.
conversation, it just started to happen in question, which was it was just interesting. But I think it's fine. I can just
I
leave
think
it the
it's
way it
fine
is.
too. I think it's
Yeah.
just, when you've got new information, a new experience, a new way of doing it, you will start to hear the upward inflection where things start to sound like questions because you're unsure. That's your
Mhm.
uncertainty coming to the surface tends to go up into a question because we're unsure.
Right.
That's all. So I
That
think
makes
that will
sense.
dissipate.
Okay.
Can we do it once where you just improvise each thing so you don't say it as it's written
Sure.
on the
Yeah.
screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Brandon, I'm posting content and I'm not sure what's going on. I'm just it's not working.
Well, I feel like most people, what you're probably doing is posting a lot of content that you know is really good, but it just goes on deaf ears. It's crickets and no one's really paying attention to it. And
Mm,
that's because you're focusing on too much, you're sharing too much information.
wow. What about when I'm selling? Because I feel like that's not working either.
Well, what happens with selling is most people feel like they have to beg and explain why someone should buy, which means you usually go to bonuses or modules or let me show you how many videos you get instead of creating an internal desire and demand for people to want to buy.
Mm. And what about the fact that when I do post content, it just feels like I'm talking to myself.
Well, if you're posting a minimum of 3 times a week and you're still not getting any traction, any engagement, no one's liking it, no one's responding, there's usually a big problem there because 3 times a week is enough to get you traction on whatever it is you want, whether it is engagement, followers, whatever. So, what you need to do is start focusing on what you're saying, not how many times you're posting per week.
Oh, okay. So what I'm saying, not how many times I'm posting per week. Well, what about like, I don't even know what I should be saying to my audience.
Problems, talk
Mm.
about their problems. The reason why that works is because that is where your audience is at. Your audience is at a problem. And when you start to speak to what they're going through, your communication becomes hyper relevant and they pay attention automatically.
Cool. All right. Now let's go back to the words and
Okay.
um, I'll lead you in.
Okay.
So Brandon, I I'm I'm posting content, but there's a problem.
You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts.
True. But what about when I'm selling? Because selling seems to be an issue as well.
So when you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It almost feels like you're preaching in order to get them to pay attention.
Yeah, you're right. And what about like, I'm posting content, but I'm not getting leads?
You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one follows your call to action, you never get any leads.
I think I've got a problem, but I don't know what the problem is with my content.
If I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people and you couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds, you have a problem. It's like you never realized that you're here to solve people's problems.
Mm. Okay, how's that feeling?
That felt good.
Yeah, it feels more like a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my focus was less on emphasizing slowing down and more of conversation on that.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. And so let's do it now, this time where I'm not going to lead you in. You're just going to go through it. But
Sure.
the key to this exercise is that it's you feel like they're asking you a question that gives you that like trigger and that instinct to then respond and say the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Okay. All right. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get any sales. So your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention. You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one ever follows your call to action, you never get any leads. If I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people in under 60 seconds, oh, wait. And if I asked you to name me 3 specific problems you solve for people, you couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds. It's like you'll never realize that you're here to solve people's problems.
Okay, how did that feel?
It felt a lot easier, smoother.
Yeah,
It felt very great on the throat, like it was not forcing anything, which was awesome.
good. Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, I thought that felt much easier, more relaxed, calmer, soother. The only thing I would layer into that now would just be a little bit of energy. Did it feel like the
Yeah.
energy kind of went flat a little bit?
I forgot to do the emotion side of it.
Oh,
Like I wasn't feeling emotion when I did it. I was more
yeah.
just trying to have a conversation with someone and that was it.
Yeah. Well,
So
that makes sense.
I can inject emotion into it. I think that would fix it.
Let's try it.
Okay. You post content you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content is all blah, 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 thinking too much.
The
Hold on.
only thing I'll say that was great is that you,
Yeah.
again, you don't have to force the emotion. You don't have to
Mm,
force us to feel a certain way or force the delivery of this is how you should feel. As long as you know what that feeling is and you allow yourself to tap into that feeling, we will
mm.
feel it.
Okay. You post you post content you're proud of. It's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention. You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one ever follows the call to action, you never get any leads. Look, if I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, you couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds. It's like you never realize that you're here to solve people's problems.
Good. Tell me what happened from because no one ever to the end. How is that different from the beginning? What did you, do you know what happened?
Because so sorry, where?
So the
Oh,
energy
right
shifted
here.
from because no one ever follows the CTA all the way to the end. What happened there?
The emotion I was going for wasn't sad. I think up above it was like sad.
Mm-hmm.
Down here it was more, it's more of a switch between like, this is more of teaching, I think. So there's just a different energy to me. It's not sadness. It's like, I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah, it was as if you were, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it felt like you were more in your head for the first two. And then when you got to
yeah.
because no one ever follows the CTA, you trusted your instincts and just
Mm,
let it go versus the other stuff you were thinking about
yeah.
how it should be delivered.
Right.
So I can
I
hear
think that's
that.
okay. All right.
And
Let me
I
try it
want to
again.
hear, I want to hear throughout that you're not thinking about it.
All right.
I
Let me
want
try it again.
whatever you did from because no one ever follows the CTA to the end. That's what I want to hear from the beginning.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content on, let me start over.
Maybe start from because no one ever start from there and then loop back up to the, so use that as a warm up and then loop back up to the beginning. So start like the second half as a warm
Oh,
up
okay.
and then
Because no one ever follows the call to action, you never get any sales. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content is always crickets and you have a ton of doubts. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention. You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week, and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one ever follows the call to action, you never get any leads. If I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, you likely couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds. It's like you never realize that you're here to solve people's problems.
good. How did that feel?
Good, but I notice a change here again as well.
Mm. There's a lot
I
more
don't know
upward
why.
inflections coming in. You're starting, I think you're tracking it somehow. So there's a little bit of like uncertainty of like, am I doing this right? I think you're going, am I doing this right? Am I saying this right? Is this
Mm,
right? And so there's a lot of upward like question, upward inflections
all right,
coming in.
I'm just gonna go for it. I'm not even gonna think at all. Just
Please.
do it. Okay. You post content you're proud of, and it's gold, but you never get any sales. Your content is always crickets, and you have a ton of doubts. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention. You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week, and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one follows your call to action, you never get any leads. If I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, you likely couldn't tell me in under 60 seconds. It's like you never realized that we're here to solve people's problems.
How did that feel?
That felt good.
Yeah, that was great.
Really? Okay, good.
That
It
was
felt like
great.
I was doing it wrong. So I think it's when I think too much about doing it
Yeah.
right, I don't do it right. So,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly. So the key is just when you think, as you speak, we hear your thoughts.
Mm,
When you just let it go, then you're connected to us and you're connected to the message that you want to share.
yeah.
And it's
Okay.
beautiful.
I think it's been one of those things where it's like follow the structure and then stop thinking. Like practice following structure. Then when it comes time, go time, stop thinking.
100,000%. That is it.
Okay.
Think of it like you are learning choreography. And if you've ever learned dance moves for anything, like you really have to think about it and allow yourself to like work through the movements. It's very
Mhm.
analytical. It's a lot of thinking. Is that, am I getting this right? Let me like really kind of work through this. And then we throw it all away the second we get in
Mm,
front of an audience. And it's all about them and connecting to them and wanting to share the message with them. It becomes about
mm,
them. They will pull it out of you as it's meant to be in that moment. And every moment's going to be different. Every time you deliver these words, it's going to be different. So if you feel yourself delivering the words the same every single week, we've lost that connection with them.
I see. Yep. I understand.
I'm going to try
Okay.
it again. Let it
Yeah.
go. Just let it go.
Okay. You post content you're proud of, it's gold, but you never get sales. Your content's always crickets and you have a ton of doubts. When you sell, it feels like you have to convince, beg, and explain why they should buy. It feels like you're almost preaching in order to get them to pay attention. You're posting a minimum of 3 times a week and no one interacts, engages, or likes the content. And because no one ever follows your call to action, you never get any leads. If I asked you to name me 3 specific problems that you solve for people in under 60 seconds, you likely couldn't do it. It's like you never realized that you're here to solve people's problems.
Great. How's that feel?
Felt good.
Yeah.
Felt really good. Still, I've caught myself thinking a little bit on the first one and then just kind of released
Yeah.
it on the second one and
Yeah.
continued down.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's all
Yeah.
you want to do is in the moment, if you catch yourself in your head, just send it back to your audience.
Okay.
The only other thing I would add to this is you can layer in a little bit of intensity to each one so it escalates the problem. So, like the
Mm.
problem's at a 1, then it goes to a 2, then it goes to a 4, then it goes to a 10. Like you can layer that in so they start to feel like, oh my gosh, yes. And I've got that. Yes. And I've got that. Oh, you're right. And I've got that. What do I do?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, any thoughts, questions about that? The sort of technical things we did with like the pacing and then the loudness on the keywords was just to get a feel for like pacing and where we can place our attention to get the attention of our audience. Again, you never want to think about that or do that
Okay.
on a webinar.
Okay. Yeah. I think just the 2 things for me is when I get into that, just, connect with them,
Yeah.
like think of it as a conversation, and then emotion, I think is
Yes.
the two biggest things. Because when I start thinking pace and tone, that's when I start getting too much.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all in just like I've got a slide of new information. I just want to kind of work through what are the points that I want my audience to hear. You kind of walk through it, you figure out where you want your message to really land with them. You talk
Yeah.
through it, make sure that it feels in alignment with you. There's no ambiguity, and then you just throw it all away.
Okay.
It's in your
Makes sense.
subconscious. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I have another one tomorrow. So it'll be a good test to see how it goes again. And hopefully it'll be better than last week. I'm sure it will.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it will be. Yeah, it's just layering on. It's just um I think this week just play around with just kind of like all the stuff that we've done is in your reservoir, it's in your subconscious. There's no need to um bring any of that to it. Just have faith that it will be present and
Mhm.
just make it about them, make it about who shows up on the day.